Thomas Brennan had been running the same corner coffee shop for 15 years. His customers knew him as a warm-hearted, ordinary businessman. But Thomas's past was 20 years as a CIA intelligence officer, and when he realized that his regular customer Viktor Petrov's daily café latte orders concealed an international espionage network, the retired agent was back on duty. Welcome to the Real Life Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of courage and hidden heroism, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. We're growing every day and sincerely thank you for being part of this journey. The brass bell above the door chimed at exactly 7:30 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 8 months. Thomas Brennan looked up from the espresso machine he was cleaning and smiled at his most punctual customer. "Good morning, Viktor." The usual. Viktor Petrov nodded with a slight accent that Thomas had long ago identified as Eastern European, probably Ukrainian or Russian, refined by years of international education. "Yes, please. Café latte, extra shot, no sugar." Thomas began the familiar routine of preparing the drink, his movements automatic after decades of muscle memory. First from CIA training, now from coffee shop repetition. Steam hissed from the milk frother as Viktor settled into his usual corner table, the one with a clear view of both the street entrance and the back exit. To any observer, Viktor appeared to be exactly what he claimed. A mid-level international business consultant who worked with Eastern European companies expanding into American markets. He dressed well but not expensively, spoke English with careful precision, and always paid cash for his coffee. Thomas had operated under similar covers for 20 years. The Grind Coffee House occupied a strategic corner in downtown Portland's business district. Thomas had chosen a location carefully when he retired from the agency, close enough to federal buildings to monitor unusual activity, positioned to observe foot traffic patterns, with multiple exit routes and excellent sight lines in all directions. His neighbors thought he'd simply found a good commercial space. Thomas knew he'd selected a perfect observation post. "Here you go, Viktor," Thomas said, delivering a latte with the same friendly smile he gave every customer. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Viktor glanced up from his smartphone, where he'd been typing what appeared to be routine business emails. "Yes, very pleasant." "Thank you, Thomas." But Thomas had noticed something Viktor didn't intend him to see. In the brief moment when Viktor looked up, the phone screen was visible, and Thomas's trained eye caught something that made his blood run cold. The email wasn't in English. It wasn't even in a standard alphabet. The characters were Cyrillic, arranged in patterns that Thomas recognized from his years monitoring Russian intelligence communications. More concerning was the attachment Viktor had been uploading, a PDF file with a naming convention that followed Russian military intelligence protocols. Thomas returned to his position behind the counter, maintaining his cheerful demeanor while his mind shifted into analytical mode. After 2 decades in intelligence, certain observations became automatic. Viktor's seating position wasn't random. His cash payments avoided digital traces, and his daily routine provided perfect cover for regular intelligence drops. Thomas began to remember things he'd previously dismissed as quirks. Viktor always arrived within a 5-minute window, always sat at the same table, and always spent exactly 37 minutes in the shop. He never varied his order, never brought reading material other than his phone, and never engaged in extended conversation with other customers. Classic operational security protocols. Over the next week, Thomas found himself observing Viktor with the analytical skills he thought were permanently retired. The coffee shop owner persona provided perfect cover for surveillance. Who would suspect a friendly barista of conducting counterintelligence operations? Thomas noticed that Viktor's visits followed a pattern more sophisticated than simple routine. Every Tuesday and Friday, Viktor would receive a text message at precisely 7:45 a.m. He would read it, delete it immediately, then spend several minutes typing what appeared to be routine business correspondence. But Thomas had positioned himself to catch glimpses of Viktor's screen during these sessions. The deleted messages contained coded language that followed Soviet-era intelligence protocols, references to product deliveries, and client meetings that had nothing to do with legitimate business consulting. More alarming was Viktor's photography habit. While appearing to take casual selfies or food photos, Viktor was systematically documenting the coffee shop's other customers, particularly those who appeared to be government employees based on their ID lanyards and security badge holders. Thomas recognized the technique. Viktor was building a database of federal personnel, cataloging their daily routines, identifying potential recruitment targets or security vulnerabilities. The grind had become an unwitting intelligence collection platform. Thomas faced a dilemma that would have been simple during his active CIA years: report the suspicious activity and let federal authorities handle the investigation. But retirement had complicated things. He had no official status, no legal authority, and no certainty that his suspicions were correct. More importantly, taking official action would destroy the quiet life he'd built. The coffee shop wasn't just his business. It was his sanctuary, his connection to normal civilian existence after decades of shadows and secrets. But national security trumped personal comfort. Thomas made his decision during Viktor's Thursday morning visit. Instead of simply observing, he would test his hypothesis through direct engagement. "Viktor," Thomas said, approaching the table with a fresh cup of coffee, "I was wondering, you mentioned you work with Eastern European businesses. Have you been following the political situation in Ukraine? Seems like it would affect your clients." Viktor's response confirmed Thomas's worst fears. The man's microexpressions, a brief tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible pause before answering, indicated he was accessing a prepared cover story. "Yes, of course. Very concerning for business stability. My clients are mostly worried about supply chain disruptions." The answer was perfectly reasonable and completely hollow. Viktor was reciting talking points, not expressing genuine knowledge or concern. Thomas nodded sympathetically. "Must be challenging to maintain operations during such uncertainty. I imagine communication with your clients becomes more complicated." Again, that micropause. Technology makes it easier than in the past. Secure communications, encrypted files. Business continues. Viktor had just revealed operational capabilities that went far beyond normal business consulting. He was essentially advertising his access to advanced communication security, exactly what a foreign intelligence operative would need. That evening, Thomas activated resources he'd hoped never to use again. In his apartment above the coffee shop, hidden behind a false wall in his bedroom closet, Thomas maintained a small but sophisticated intelligence collection kit. The equipment was technically illegal for civilian use, but Thomas had accumulated it during his CIA years and never turned it in upon retirement. His former supervisors had looked the other way. Veteran intelligence officers often kept insurance against future threats. Thomas installed microsurveillance devices throughout the coffee shop, positioned to monitor Viktor's activities without violating other customers' privacy. Audio pickups focused on Viktor's table. Micro cameras tracked his movements, and signal interceptors monitored his electronic communications. Within 3 days, Thomas had confirmation of his suspicions and evidence of something far worse than he'd imagined. Viktor Petrov wasn't just conducting routine intelligence collection. He was running a sophisticated spy network that used the grind as a central coordination point. Other customers, people Thomas had served coffee to for months, were revealed to be part of Viktor's operation. Dr. Sarah Chun, who Thomas had always assumed was a research scientist at the nearby medical university, was actually passing classified biotechnology research to Viktor during their apparent casual conversations. Marcus Williams, a federal employee who worked at the Department of Energy, was using his laptop at the coffee shop to access sensitive databases, then leaving USB drives in predetermined locations for Viktor to collect. Elena Rodriguez, a State Department translator, was photographing confidential documents with her smartphone, then transmitting them to Viktor through an encrypted messaging app. The grind wasn't just hosting a single spy. It was the operational center of an entire espionage network that was stealing American secrets across multiple government agencies and private research institutions. Thomas realized he was facing the largest counterintelligence challenge of his career, and he was completely on his own. Thomas spent a sleepless night weighing his options. The evidence he collected was sufficient to bring down Viktor's entire network, but taking action would require revealing his own identity and capabilities. Contacting the FBI would mean exposing his illegal surveillance equipment and admitting he'd been conducting unauthorized intelligence operations. His retirement agreement with the CIA specifically prohibited such activities. More personally, destroying the spy network would mean losing the grind. The coffee shop would become a crime scene, his customers would be interrogated, and his peaceful civilian life would be over. But the security implications were staggering. Viktor's network had access to biotechnology research that could be weaponized, energy infrastructure data that could enable cyber attacks, and diplomatic intelligence that could compromise American foreign policy. Thomas understood that some duties transcended personal comfort. The next morning, as Viktor entered the grind at his usual time, Thomas made his decision. Instead of calling federal authorities, he would handle the situation himself, quietly, professionally, and in a way that protected both national security and his civilian cover. Thomas had spent 20 years learning how to neutralize intelligence threats. It was time to apply those skills one final time. "Good morning, Viktor," Thomas said with his usual friendly smile. "The usual?" Viktor nodded, settling into his corner table as Thomas prepared the café latte. But this morning, Thomas made a small addition to Viktor's drink, a mild sedative that would cause drowsiness without obvious symptoms. Thomas had learned long ago that the most effective operations were invisible ones. 30 minutes after drinking his modified latte, Viktor was fighting to stay alert. Thomas had timed the dosage perfectly, enough to impair Viktor's reflexes and judgment, not enough to cause obvious medical distress. Thomas flipped the "closed for maintenance" sign and locked the front door. The other customers had finished their morning coffees and left for work, leaving Viktor alone in the shop of a man he thought was a harmless barista. "Feeling tired this morning, Viktor?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying a different tone than Viktor had ever heard before. Viktor looked up, blinking rapidly as he tried to focus. Something was wrong, but his compromised mental state made it difficult to process the threat. "Yes, perhaps I need more coffee," Viktor said, his accent slightly thicker as the sedative affected his speech controls. Thomas walked over to Viktor's table and sat down across from him. "I don't think more coffee is going to help. In fact, I think you've had quite enough of my special brew." Viktor's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket pocket, but Thomas was faster, grabbing Viktor's wrist with a grip that demonstrated years of combat training. "Let's not make this more complicated than necessary," Thomas said calmly. "I know who you are, Viktor Petrov, or should I say Colonel Viktor Petrov, GRU Intelligence Services, currently running an espionage network targeting American government and research facilities." Viktor's eyes widened as the sedative fog realization hit him. Who are you?" Thomas smiled with cold professionalism. "Thomas Brennan, former CIA intelligence officer, currently a very concerned citizen who doesn't appreciate foreign spies using his coffee shop as an operational base." Viktor tried to stand but found his legs unsteady. The sedative had effectively neutralized him without causing permanent harm, exactly as Thomas had calculated. "What do you want?" Viktor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas pulled out a tablet computer and displayed the surveillance evidence he collected. Photos of Viktor's covert communications, recordings of his coded conversations, documentation of his network's activities. "I want you to understand that your operation is completely compromised," Thomas said. "I have evidence of every member of your network, every intelligence product they've stolen, every security breach they've committed." Viktor stared at the evidence with growing horror. His entire operation, months of careful work, had been unraveled by a coffee shop owner he dismissed as irrelevant. "What were you going to do?" Viktor asked. Thomas considered this question carefully. "That depends entirely on your next choices, Colonel." Thomas had conducted dozens of agent recruitment operations during his CIA career. The key was always offering choices that appeared to benefit the target, while actually serving American interests. You have two options, Viktor, Thomas said, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards. Option 1. I contact the FBI immediately. Within 6 hours, you and your entire network are arrested, charged with espionage, and facing life in federal prison. Your cover is blown, your career is over, and your usefulness to Russian intelligence ends permanently. Viktor swallowed hard, the sedative making it difficult to think through the implications. Option 2, Thomas continued, is more interesting. You continue your routine, maintain your cover, and keep meeting with your network. But from now on, you're working for me. Viktor's confusion was evident. Working for you? I don't understand. Thomas smiled. Double agent, Viktor. You feed your handlers in Moscow carefully selected intelligence, information that appears valuable but actually serves American interests. Meanwhile, you provide me with detailed information about Russian intelligence operations. It was a classic counterintelligence gambit. Turn the enemy's assets against them while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. Why would I agree to this? Viktor asked, though his weakened state made negotiation difficult. Thomas tapped the tablet, because the alternative is immediate arrest and prosecution. At least this way, you maintain some control over your fate. Viktor was silent for several minutes, processing the impossible situation. He'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd never suspected, trapped by his own operational security failures. How do I know you won't simply expose me anyway? Viktor finally asked. Thomas stood up and walked to the coffee machine, beginning to prepare another latte. Because I'm not interested in destroying your life, Viktor. I'm interested in protecting American national security. If you work with me, we both get what we need. Viktor watched Thomas work, recognizing the practice efficiency that revealed years of operational experience. You were really CIA? 20 years, Thomas confirmed. Retired 5 years ago. Thought I was done with this business. Then you started using my coffee shop for your operation. Thomas brought the fresh latte to Viktor's table. Drink this. It's clean, no enhancements. You'll need to be clear-headed for what comes next. Viktor accepted the coffee gratefully, his body craving normalcy after the morning's revelations. What comes next? Viktor asked. Thomas sat down again, his demeanor shifting from interrogator to handler. First, you're going to contact your network and tell them to continue normal operations. Second, you're going to prepare a detailed briefing on every aspect of your intelligence collection activities. Third, you're going to help me identify other Russian operations in the Pacific Northwest. Viktor nodded slowly, understanding that he had no real choice. And in return, you continue your cover life, maintain your income, and avoid federal prison. Eventually, when this operation concludes, you'll have options for defection or repatriation, depending on your preferences. It was more generous than Viktor had any right to expect, and both men knew it. Over the following weeks, the grind returned to apparent normalcy. Viktor continued his daily visits, maintaining his routine while secretly reporting to Thomas on every aspect of his intelligence operations. Thomas learned that Viktor's network was more extensive than he'd initially suspected. Russian intelligence had been systematically targeting Portland's technology sector, academic research institutions, and federal facilities for over 2 years. The operation was part of a broader campaign to steal American innovations in biotechnology, renewable energy, and cybersecurity. Viktor's team had successfully penetrated research programs worth hundreds of millions of dollars in development costs. But now, under Thomas's direction, the network was being turned against its handlers. Instead of stealing genuine American secrets, Viktor's team was feeding carefully crafted disinformation to Moscow, false research data, misleading technical specifications, and strategic intelligence designed to waste Russian resources on worthless projects. Thomas coordinated the deception operation, using the same skills he developed during his CIA career, but with one crucial difference. He was operated without official authorization or oversight. He was conducting a rogue counterintelligence operation from a coffee shop. The risk was enormous. If federal authorities discovered his activities, Thomas could face prosecution for unauthorized intelligence operations. If Russian intelligence realized their network had been compromised, Viktor and his team could face assassination. But the operation was working. Intelligence reports indicated that Russian technology development programs were being misdirected by the false information Viktor's network was providing. Thomas had successfully turned an enemy espionage operation into an American strategic advantage, all while maintaining his cover as a small business owner. 3 months into the deception operation, Thomas faced a challenge he hadn't anticipated: genuine affection for his unknowing double agent. Viktor had begun to relax during his daily visits to the grind, engaging in actual conversations rather than maintaining strict operational security. Thomas learned that Viktor had a daughter studying medicine in Prague, that he missed European coffee culture, and that he'd originally intended his American assignment to be temporary. More surprisingly, Viktor began displaying genuine curiosity about American life. He asked Thomas about local history, recommended restaurants, and even attended a Portland Timbers soccer match that Thomas had mentioned enjoying. The professional relationship was becoming personal, complicating Thomas's emotional investment in the operation. Thomas also discovered that Viktor's recruitment by Russian intelligence hadn't been entirely voluntary. Financial pressures and subtle threats against his family had pushed Viktor into espionage work he found distasteful. Viktor wasn't an ideological enemy of the United States. He was a man trapped by circumstances beyond his control. This realization forced Thomas to confront uncomfortable questions about the ethics of his operation. Was he protecting American security, or was he exploiting a victim of Russian coercion? The moral complexity deepened when Viktor began expressing interest in permanently relocating to the United States. During one of their morning conversations, Viktor mentioned that he'd grown to appreciate American freedoms and wondered about immigration procedures. Thomas realized that Viktor might genuinely want an effect, but the ongoing deception operation made that impossible. Viktor's value as a double agent depended on maintaining his Russian intelligence connections. Thomas faced a choice between maximizing operational advantage and respecting Viktor's human agency. The dilemma reached crisis level when Viktor's Russian handlers demanded a significant intelligence breakthrough. Moscow was becoming suspicious of the poor quality information Viktor's network had been providing and ordered him to produce actionable intelligence within 2 weeks. Viktor came to Thomas in obvious distress, explaining that failure to satisfy his handlers will result in reassignment or worse. "They're losing patience," Viktor said during their private meeting in the coffee shop's back office. "My handler said the information I've been providing is inconsistent with regional intelligence priorities." Thomas understood the implications. Russian intelligence was smart enough to recognize when their operations were being manipulated. The deception couldn't continue indefinitely. What specifically are they demanding? Thomas asked. Viktor pulled out a written list. Detailed floor plans for the federal courthouse, personnel schedules for the FBI field office, and technical specifications for the city's emergency communication systems. Thomas studied the requirements with growing concern. These weren't requests for research data or economic intelligence. They were targeting information needed for terrorist attacks or sabotage operations. "Viktor," Thomas said carefully, "you understand what they're planning to do with this information?" Viktor nodded miserably. "I've been trying to avoid thinking about it. But yes, I understand." Thomas faced the most difficult decision of his intelligence career. Providing the requested information would maintain Viktor's cover and continue the deception operation, but it would also enable potential attacks against American targets. Refusing to provide the information would protect American security, but would expose Viktor to lethal retaliation from his handlers. There was no clean solution. "Viktor," Thomas said finally, "I need you to understand something. I'm not going to help you provide information that could be used to hurt innocent people. That's a line I won't cross." Viktor looked relieved rather than disappointed. "I was hoping you would say that. I don't want to be responsible for attacks on Americans. These people have been kind to me." Thomas smiled sadly. Then we need to find you a way out of the situation. Thomas spent the next 48 hours developing an extraction plan that would protect Viktor while neutralizing the remaining spy network. It would be the most complex operation of his career, and he would have to execute it without official support. The plan required precise timing and multiple deceptions. First, Thomas would contact his former CIA colleagues through unofficial channels, providing them with intelligence about the Russian network while protecting Viktor's cooperation. Second, Viktor would provide his handlers with modified intelligence, information that appeared valuable but contained subtle flaws that would reveal its false nature to American security services. Third, Thomas would stage Viktor's apparent death in a way that satisfied Russian intelligence, while actually facilitating his disappearance into witness protection. The operation began on a rainy Tuesday morning. Viktor entered the grind at his usual time, but instead of his normal corner table, Thomas directed him to a booth near the back exit. "Today's the day," Thomas said quietly, delivering Viktor's final latte at the grind. "Are you ready?" Viktor nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "My daughter. Will I ever be able to contact her?" Thomas had anticipated this question. "Eventually, yes, but it will take time to ensure her safety. Russian intelligence will investigate your disappearance thoroughly." Viktor accepted this sadly but with understanding. "She's smart. She'll know I did what I had to do." At exactly 10:15 a.m., Viktor left the grind and walked toward the waterfront, carrying a briefcase containing the falsified intelligence his handlers had demanded. Thomas watched him go, knowing it was the last time Viktor Petrov would exist. By noon, Portland police would find Viktor's abandoned car near the Willamette River, along with a suicide note expressing guilt over his espionage activities. The briefcase would be missing, suggesting Viktor had delivered his final intelligence product before taking his own life. Russian intelligence would consider the case closed. American authorities would quietly round up the remaining network members using information Thomas had provided, and Viktor would begin a new life under a new identity, protected by a witness security program that officially didn't know he existed. Epilogue. The new normal 6 months later, Thomas continued operating the grind as if nothing had changed. The coffee shop remained popular with federal employees, university researchers, and international business travelers. Thomas served coffee with the same friendly smile, remembered customers' preferences, and maintained his reputation as the neighborhood's most reliable barista. But he never stopped watching. Intelligence work had taught Thomas that threats could emerge anywhere at any time. His coffee shop provided perfect cover for monitoring potential security risks, while maintaining the civilian life he'd worked to build. Occasionally, Thomas received coded messages through secure channels, updates on Viktor's successful integration into his new life, intelligence about other foreign operations in the Pacific Northwest, and appreciation from former colleagues for services that would never be officially acknowledged. Thomas had proved that retirement from intelligence work was more of a career change than an ending. The skills remained, the threats continued, and the duty to protect American interests never truly expired. One morning, a new customer entered the grind, a well-dressed woman with a slight accent who ordered her coffee with the kind precision that suggested operational training. Thomas smiled warmly and began preparing her drink, while mentally cataloging her appearance, behavior patterns, and potential security significance. The coffee shop owner was vigilant once again. "Welcome to the grind," Thomas said cheerfully. "What can I get started for you today?" Because in the world of intelligence, every day brought new opportunities to serve both great coffee and national security, even if the customers never realized they were benefiting from both. Thomas Brennan had learned that the most effective cover identities were the ones that allowed you to do what you'd always done, just under different circumstances. He'd been protecting people his entire career. Now, he did it one cup of coffee at a time. Some missions never really end. They just find new venues. And sometimes, the best place to spot a spy is from behind an espresso machine, where everyone eventually reveals their true preferences.